Hello again. So this is my the sixth development diary. I can't believe it's been nearly 3 weeks since I last did one of these. Time is certainly flying by. I guess I kind of didn't really want to do an update because I've mostly just been prototyping things, playing around with a few ideas, doing quite a bit of game design type stuff away from the computer, playing around with Blender quite a bit. I'm still learning to use that, and did some animation sort of. Playing around with the rigging system and the physics you can do in Blender, and just generally learning to be a better 3D modeler in general. I mean, it may not be specifically relevant to the game right now, but I'm still interested in developing my ability to actually do graphical stuff. What I've sort of been doing in terms of the actual game itself is sort of looking at the ground elements, and I'm clearly just using cylinders and boxes here to represent potential things that could be on the ground. There's also these little lines which are line rendering components in Unity, just sort of give me an illustration of the height of things, and obviously it's in the dark so you can't see very much, but I was sort of looking at using lights and things like that to sort of illuminate things on the dark side. There is actually a sort of prototype unit here as well. You can move it about, and sort of what I've really been bogged down with here is for the past few weeks is there's such a vital part of the game now that I need to work on that I never necessarily thought out very well, and I guess I'm showing you this development build. It's sort of very much something that's a work in progress, and something that is really important and core to the game that I really feel like I need to get right. So at first I was consumed by the idea that I needed to keep things at scale. So we've seen ships in orbit, and we know that so this is the orbital layer. The idea in my mind was always that the things on the ground were going to be to scale with what you could see from the orbit view. But playing around with this, and I did some tiny little circles that you would click on and you'd bring up another interface. You have like a world space UI or a separate window altogether. And this works, but I'm not sure it's very interesting. I think from a game design perspective, I'm not sure there's any point avoiding most of the planetary surface just because I want to have the actual action going on at a true to scale point on the planet. Because, obviously you wouldn't see this unit moving around from space. I've got it going very slowly, but it still doesn't necessarily fit, and that was a bit frustrating, really, because I always sort of intended for it to be quite. I was going for a realism angle here. There's a lot of games out with cutesy graphics, and I like those, but this is a grim and very, I don't know, quite dark vision of the future. I guess we're a fleet on the run, after all. And the planets are going to throw all sorts of dangers our way. So I was consumed by this, trying to get the scale right. And I think I've just come to the idea that from a game design perspective, it makes no sense to ignore most of the planet's surface just because I'm trying to make it look realistic. And so I guess really I do just want to do a real-time strategy type layer on the ground. You'll actually be able to move your units around. Units will actually be comprised of two elements. So you'll have a worker type, which in this case is an engineer, and you'll have the abilities of the engineer on this bar here. You have the amount of people that you contributed towards the unit, and you'll actually have a vehicle which you attach to a unit, and the vehicle itself will actually provide abilities related to that vehicle to the unit as a whole. So you're sort of creating a unit which is comprised of two elements. So you've got the actual people who do the work on the ground, And so typical things you'll click on will be like build refinery, or do a mining operation, or repair a unit, or that sort of thing. I mean, for the engineer at least. So if you sent down a different type of unit, like say a pilot, they wouldn't be able to do those things. And you'd probably want to attach them to some sort of airborne unit in order to actually make use of their skills. And so you move things around the planet, you build things, you do mining, you do farming, you do any kind of fabrication you need, and then it's redistributed towards a sort of central sort of landing site, which will probably have its own inventory, which you can then share with any unit that you've got hovering over a certain area around the planet. So you'd be able to form a connection between these 2 points, send anything in the ship down to the planet if you need to, and vice versa. So going to planets is important to restock upon supplies. And obviously I realise my planet services are completely non-functional at the moment. There's really no point to go down there. There's nothing to mine, and there's nothing to see, and there's no hazards or anything like that. I did actually implement a weather system, which I've only got working on the terrestrial model at the moment. So I sort of tried to think about the best way to do an atmosphere, the actual cloud layer. And this actually uses a particle system. And it's a layer of it's several layers of different particle systems. And it is actually moving, and it sort of rotates to try to simulate sort of the chaos of a cloud system on Earth. I have been looking at reference photos of Earth, and there's no way I'm ever going to create something that looks completely realistic. But what this actually does is, this is quite a random arrangement. But what I realize you can do is you can actually create localized weather systems by creating sort of strips that would represent like a weather front. So I could actually do localized particle systems, which means that I could create a weather system that affects a certain point on the planet, rather than the global situation I've got at the moment. I don't think it looks terrible, certainly not for an early prototype. And it doesn't look terrible from the orbit layer either. I mean, you can clearly see that it's a particle system, but it's extending out beyond the atmosphere. So it's sort of flat regions of randomly sized particles. There will actually be an atmospheric sort of layer coming out from the planet anyway, so you won't be able to see that. And I don't think it looks terrible for a first pass, but it clearly needs a lot more work. It's a bit too reliant on these big blotches of white clouds, which doesn't look very realistic, but without them you don't really have enough cloud density. So those are the things I've really been working on. It's been heavy on game design because I'm really keen to get the ship unit interaction working really well. And this is the core of the game, that you move ships around to planets. You have to make these conscious choices of which planets to land on, send your expeditions down to get what you need. You're not creating a permanent colony. You're doing what you can, and then the danger is going to come in some form, whether it be on the planet or whether it be the invader force catching up with you, and you've got to evacuate as quickly as you can. And so we sort of remove the obstacle of micromanagement in terms of the colonies, because we don't need to worry about the colonies growing to be planet size, because you're not going to have that much time. You're not going to get to build absolutely everything in the tech tree or in your production queue at all times. So it's like you approach a planet, and hopefully it's never going to get boring, because every planet will be unique in some fashion. It certainly won't be like this where it's just a texture. I do want to do procedural generation. I do want to have little stories that go on the planet, and I don't need to worry about them being prolonged stories or prolonged scenarios, because you're not necessarily going to be on each planet long enough that I need to worry about the sort of the future of you colonizing the whole planet, because you're not going to get to do that. That's not what this game is. You're constantly on the run. You're trying to make the most of every opportunity to get certain things mined and constructed in order to keep your fleet going. So I think there's still some potential for diverse storytelling in a sense. You could have Again, you go back to the cloud system, you can have extreme weather systems coming in, and because it's particles, it can actually interact with your units. You can put triggers on there, you can have collision events. So you'll start impacting all your buildings, a bit like what you see in The Martian. You could have diseases on the planets, which could, you would, I know this is topical, but you'd have to quarantine your people. If you let them go back to your ship, it'll just start spreading aboard the ship. You have to get your medics involved, and you need to try to cure that. You could have seismic activity on certain planets, so you've got really valuable resources available, but you can't. You're obviously in a lot of jeopardy because of the volatility of the planet. You could have indigenous wildlife that's attacking you all the time. And you have to send down lots of units to sort of maintain a perimeter whilst you're trying to mine things. There could just be, the scenarios are potentially endless. You have alien ruins, you have abandoned cities to explore. You could have planets where technology doesn't really work very well. So you've got to send people on local, riding local wildlife around, that kind of thing. Meteor showers. There's all sorts of things I can think of. We can really dig into the whole library of sci-fi to make the planets unique, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that they look super unique. They just have to feel unique. As I sort of alluded to here, we've got the engineer. You can now actually. I've sort of introduced the workers, or the sort of the roles of the types of people that you can have aboard your fleets and sort of utilised on the ground. These are only silhouettes. Obviously, I'd like to do some proper character design or sense here, but in principle, we got white here as the workers, the unskilled labourers. We've got the naval officers. We've got engineers. We've got scientists, we've got the guys with the guns, the military guys, we've got the pilots, and we've got medics. So those are the 7 sort of main roles I'm going with at the moment. And I've just originally I was going to use like a separate window that would list how many of each skill set you've actually got on each ship. But I figured, why not just add them into the inventory and just not give them, not let them take up cargo space. They'll take up living space instead, which will probably be another bar. And so sort of condensed it into the inventory. And the idea is that each of these will actually have their own sort of tech tree, or like a talent tree, I suppose. So it's a bit like when you've got classes in an RPG. So you've got mage, warlock, warrior, etc., and so there'll be sort of multiple trees that options you can take in the talent tree for each particular one, and like upgrade their various skills as you gain new research icons and such. So like scientists will be able to investigate things on the ground when you start, and then eventually they'll get more talents that will improve that, or allow them to do things that improve your own ships based on alien technology you find, things like that. So as you then will have a separate screen, which I'm yet to introduce, which you'll be able to sort of position alongside, and you'll be able to create a unit, which, much like what I was saying earlier, you assign essentially one of these types of professions or skills or workers, and so that forms the main type of your unit, and then you attach a vehicle to it, which gives it some, it gives it more variability. Is that a word? No. Gives it more versatility, allows it to move around, maybe allows it to attack and that sort of thing. And just because you've assigned your unit to be of a main type doesn't mean you can't add in the skills from other types. So you can create quite a diverse unit based on what sort of people you add to that unit. You can sort of borrow borrow talents or abilities from each of the different roles in order to make your unit quite particular for a certain need. And then you'll sort of have a component on the ship, which is sort of like your embarkment bay, or some sort of landing bay, where you can basically prepare your vehicles and your units. You slot them in, And then when you go over the planet, you can literally just click, send it down, and then you can start building things with that unit, or moving around the planet, exploring, whatever you're going to do. So that's where I am really. It's been heavy on game design because I'm aware that the choices I make over the sort of the next month or so related to interactions between the two layers is really going to make the difference between how the how the game really pans out, how interesting it is ultimately going to be, and just how much fun it could actually end up being to interact with these planets, rather than it just being, oh, I need to send down some miners to get some stuff because I need it, which isn't particularly interesting gameplay. So I guess I'll leave it there. I'm sure I've talked way too much again, but I don't know. I mean, it's been a little bit frustrating because I'd never really thought out exactly how the interaction with the planet was going to go on. But I think I've got a pathway forward now. I'm going to try out this prototype and get the abilities system going for each of the 7 roles, and I'm going to get the unit construction screen sorted, and then make it so you can move these over into the units, and then actually have the component on the ship which allows you to move it down to the planet. So that's the next steps, and actually building things on the planets. I'm still not going to worry too much about how the planets look for now. I definitely know that that's going to come at some point. We've got to get rid of these textures and actually make them interesting looking, but that's further down the road for me. Okay, thanks for watching. Just wanted to update anyone who was still paying attention, and obviously I'm very happy to answer any questions that anyone may have on the game, and otherwise, see you soon.